By the late 2000s, first-person games, shooters especially, were becoming somewhat homogenous. Call of Duty had cemented itself as an industry titan, Brown and Grey were king, and most shooters were either sci-fi, military, or military sci-fi themed. Chilean brothers Andres, Carlos, and Edmundo Bordeaux set out to make something different with their development studio, Ace Team Software. The result, Zeno Clash, would be a fantasy punk first-person brawler and would spawn both a direct sequel and a spiritual successor in the form of Clash Artifacts of Chaos. We're going to be having a look at all three of these today. 2009's Zeno Clash first introduces the world of Zenozoik through the eyes of Gat. Gat is a member of a large family, a wide variety of brothers and sisters, all under the watchful eye of their combination matriarch and patriarch father-mother. The game starts out with Gat murdering father-mother and fleeing the city of Halston. The narrative isn't delivered chronologically, which I'm often skeptical of, but it works here. Gat is aided in his escape by Dedra, and switching between their current travels and Gat's description of what happened before the game, where he was in his absence and why he turned on his family, makes up the bulk of the game's plot. Gat's caginess and unwillingness to actually share father-mother's secret gives the game a decent sense of mystery and tension. Meanwhile, Dedra's unfamiliarity with the world beyond Halston allows her to act as an audience surrogate, having both characters familiar with Halston, Gat having knowledge of the lands around it, and neither having knowledge of the even further lands, establishes an escalating sense of strangeness the further into the game you get, which is impressive given how strange things already are at the outset. Xenoclash plays well, but it's experiencing Zenozoik itself that is the real draw of the series. Inspired by the triptychs of Hieronymus Bosch and the punk fantasy works of John Blanche, Zenozoik is an eclectic and chaotic world. Every area you travel through is filled with strange details and denizens. It's an anarchic world, aesthetically and socially. Halston has no government or ruler, instead various gangs and tribes are in control, Gat's family being one of the larger and stronger groups in the area. The city, like the world beyond it, draws from a mix of aesthetic traditions, a combination of Western and Eastern influences combined with tribalist overtones. The streets of Halston are a claustrophobic warren of ramshackle houses, rough stone buildings held up and together with wooden struts and metal pipes, all adorned with bones and shells. It's organic feeling, something that grew over a great stretch of time like a coral reef or a termite spire. The citizens of Zenozoik are similarly eclectic. Some are human, like Gat or Dedra, but most are far stranger. Mixes of humans and animals, birds and lizards, or even larger enemies mixed with bears and elephants. Beyond those, there are citizens that defy any kind of standard comparison, like the strange barrel frogs. The entire aesthetic is unlike anything that I've encountered in gaming previously. It often feels like something you'd be more likely to see in stop-motion animation or one of Jim Henson's darker films. The rough organic structures crisscrossed with metal and wood give the feel of an environment kit-bashed from clay and spare parts. The citizens too have a mixed feeling, some built from clay, others from fur and leaves, others still from spare parts again. It gives the feeling of something that would be more commonly watched passively, so to engage with it and explore it in person is a wonderful experience. It's the kind of thing that makes games genuinely unique as a medium, and it's a shame that these kinds of experiences aren't more common. Beyond the outskirts of Halston are the forests belonging to the Corwid of the Free, at least as far as a Corwid can be considered to own anything. While the citizens of Halston have their loose-knit tribes and gangs, the Corwid are even more anarchic. Dedra, despite her caring nature and capacity for empathy, fears them, thinking them mad, an opinion shared by many of the other denizens of Zenozoik. Gat, however, knows them better. He lived among them for a month while in self-exile before the game, and this has given him a level of respect for them, even a degree of reverence. The Corwid, he explains, are not slaves to reality, nor to need, common sense, or morality. They are free to be as true to themselves as possible, regardless of what that might mean. Oxometer walks in a straight line, letting nothing stop him or break his path. That's just what Oxometer does. Amina peed on herself and starved to death. That's just what she did. Of course, this leads some to violence. Helim needs to be invisible so he removes the eyes from anything that can see him, or Gable needs to eat people. That's just what he does. Gat doesn't hold that against him. It's simply Gable's nature, but when Gat was captured by him, he didn't feel the need to be eaten, so he decided not to be. It's an unusual take on mental health. It's not uncommon for media to demonise those with mental health issues, but Zeno Clash makes enemies of them without actually passing any judgment upon them. Though Daedra fears them due to lack of understanding, the game doesn't judge them for their differences. If anything, it portrays them more sympathetically than the game's other enemies, Father Mother's children, or the North Gate gang who hunt you for vengeance, for profit, or to hide a secret. The Corvids fight you simply because it was in their nature to do so. They aren't villains for that, they simply are. Gat's understanding for their way of life can be best summed up by the most important of the Corvid. Metamok took Gat in during his exile. As he puts it, quote, "If you are satisfied and do what you feel you must do, no matter what that is, then you have reached perfection." End quote. Gat has internalised this philosophy of radical self-truth. It's what led to him to return to Houston to uncover Father Mother's secret and to ultimately killing them. It's what he felt he must do. Metamok felt that he must pass on all his teachings, his knowledge of combat, to someone else, to Gat, and then kill himself, which is just what Metamok did. The land of Zenozoik stretches beyond the woods, though not that far as it turns out. Daedra and Gat continue their journey through a desert and the giant strange beasts that call it home, and eventually reach the end of the world. The end world is a desolate landscape cloaked in permanent night, lit by strange lights in the sky, devoid of life save for the obsidian statues that crawl out of the ground to attack you. It manages to feel alien and sinister in a world that is already packed with strange scenery and unusual inhabitants to the player's eyes, but here the world is strange to the characters also, and the artwork and writing does a good job of conveying that. Deep within lies a grand structure, filled with mechanisms that seem as much magic as they are technological. The angles and scale, as well as the basic layout of the structure, is most reminiscent of ancient Egyptian temple cities, such as Luxor or Karnak. But the black marble blocks and gold ornamentation, evocative of insect carapaces, gives the place a unique feel that, much like Houston and the lands between, reaches far beyond the influences it initially drew from to create something truly original. Seated upon a throne at the heart of the temple is the Golem, a being whose appearance matches that of the temple around him. He knows Gat and Daedra, knows their journey. In fact, he seems to know everything about Zenozoik, though he is reluctant to share much of it. The Golem urges the pair to return to Houston, where he will accompany them and, by his words, end all conflict. The swirling energies and jagged rocks beyond the temple leave little choice in the matter. The return journey is quicker under the Golem's guidance. He knows a secret river, forgotten by all creatures with reason, through the desert, a boat ride along which hastens things radically. I'm on record as having loved Unreal's quiet boat ride through the Serpent Canyons, and I feel the same way here. The secret river through the desert is my favourite level in the game, despite the gameplay focusing on Zeno Clash's underwhelming firearms, being little more than a shooting gallery, but the narrative inclusion is very strong. It shows the Golem's uncommon knowledge of the land, a glimpse of the people who live deep in the desert, all of it reinforcing the size and scale of the world. Even in returning through an area you've already passed by, there are things neither the player nor the characters have seen, that even after travelling to the end of the world, there is still so much to be seen in Zenozoik, stranger than anything that has been encountered before, all the while creating a quiet moment of reflection before the culmination of the plot. Through all this, Golem speaks of strange concepts such as history and criminals. He knows Zenozoik's past and claims to understand its future. He also knows about the things you pass on your journey, though sees no purpose in sharing the knowledge, as even the residents have forgotten. Golem is clearly old, knowledgeable, but he also looks down on the people of Zenozoik. Despite the safety he proclaims, his presence does not bring any comfort. If he looks down on Gat and Daedra, Golem has nothing but contempt for the Corvid. While Gat respects them for being so true to themselves, Golem despises them for the effects their actions have on others. As he sees it, if the Corvid refuse to engage with the general consensus of reality, the least they could do is fall into apathy to not affect others by their actions. It's not highly expanded upon, and the conversation gives way to combat quite quickly, but the groundwork for ideological conflict between Gat and the Golem is being laid, further enhancing the sense that Gat and Daedra don't really know what they're bringing back with them. When the group finally arrives back in Houston, it is revealed that Gat failed to kill Father Mother, so conflict is inevitable. Father Mother's design is as good as anything else in the game, managing to be at once sinister and pathetic, but the boss fight is a little weak. a duplicate of a fight earlier in a flashback. But as the fight reaches its climax, Golem reveals his power, and how he intends to end all conflict. Golem can link himself to others, reflecting any damage inflicted upon himself to anyone so linked. Since he can take much more damage than anyone else in Zenozoik, this makes him unbeatable in a stand-up fight, and he uses it here to end the fight between Gat and Father Mother. Golem breaks his own hand, a trivial injury for him, but Gat and Father Mother are instantly incapacitated. The conflict is over, enforced by the Golem. While Gat is willing to let Father Mother's secret remain such, Golem insists on revealing it to everyone. Father Mother is neither father nor mother to any of their children. Each has been kidnapped from around Zenozoik as a child. There is a slight sticking point here too. Golem makes specific mention that Father Mother is biologically male and incapable of giving birth. It's only a single line of dialogue, but it does introduce my biggest issue with the narrative. LGBT identities have long been vilified within media. This predates even the Hays Code in Hollywood, which of course was not developed in a vacuum. Even since then, LGBT and especially gender non-conforming identities such as trans or intersex people tend towards being used as villains or seen with suspicion. From Psycho to Silence of the Lambs, these kinds of identities are seen as inherently dangerous, which is obviously false. These days, trans people specifically are facing one of the most hostile cultural environments in a long time, with wealthy and powerful groups and individuals actively trying to strip their existing rights from them and making living as a trans person harder and more dangerous. It's unfortunate then that these issues raise their head in Zeno Clash. It's inherently slightly problematic that even before the reveal, Father Mother's dual nature is utilised as an unusual aspect to reinforce the chaotic nature of Zenozoik, but the reveal that they were biologically male feeds into anti-trans narratives of predatory trans women. However, I fully believe this is an unintentional read of the narrative. Golem's mention of Father Mother being male is brief, and it's clear that it is not their nature that is being judged as monstrous, but their actions. I think the inclusion is just an attempt at a shorthand method of clearly stating none of the family are Father Mother's biological children, and while the kidnapping itself is clearly shown as the crime, it's unfortunate that the method of doing so accidentally feeds into pre-existing biases against marginalised groups. The arrival of Golem to Halston will have far greater impact than just ending the conflict amongst Gat's siblings, though. When Gat and Daedra returned from the end of the world, they brought something more with them than just a powerful being. They brought back something truly alien to the people of Zenozoik, the very concept of law. Golem's influence will spread and affect the city in ways they couldn't have predicted, and examining the results of that will be the focus of the sequel. Zeno Clash 2 picks up sometime later. Golem's influence over the city is well established, and Gat is trying to keep his head down, dissatisfied with the changes his adventures have brought about. This is where Remat finds him. Remat is another of Father Mother's children. She was a recurring enemy in the first game, implied to be, if not the leader, then a higher-ranking member of Father Mother's family. She still has misgivings about Gat and his actions, but as the only other member of her family who didn't ask Golem about their original parents, she has no one else to turn to. She's breaking Father Mother out of jail, and you're going to help her. Jail is of course one of those strange concepts introduced by the Golem, as are the enforcers who now patrol the city. Features not all of the citizens of Halston are particularly pleased with, though Golem insists he only told the people of these ideas. It was they who began implementing them. It was the people who decided Father Mother should be locked up for an indeterminate amount of time. The jailbreak is just the inciting incident, of course. In fact, it wasn't even particularly necessary. As soon as Gat and Remat reach Father Mother's cell, they bust themselves out, and Golem lets them. He believes Father Mother should be imprisoned, but agrees that they didn't receive something called a trial. He doesn't expect what he sees as Gat and Remat's primitive viewpoint to be able to understand what that is, but he begins to work setting up something similar, more fitting for the circumstances. The jailbreak and flight from Halston shows all the major changes since the first game, for better and for worse. The largest, most influential shift being the open-world nature of the game. While the first was a strictly linear sequence of levels in terms of progression, if not chronology, the sequel leaves the player free to roam Zenozoik at their own pace. though the progression of objectives is still mostly linear, with a few instances of multiple objectives being available at once. To facilitate this, the world is much larger in some ways. Almost every area from the first game reappears, with many new areas and zones added between, but in another way it makes the world smaller. Halston before felt like a vast warren of claustrophobic streets, dwarfing and trapping the player, but once you can roam it freely, it feels small now. You can cross the whole thing in a minute. Further, the claustrophobia is gone. The streets have been widened to facilitate cooperative play and larger fights, but the buildings have also been made shorter. What once felt like a confusing mass of narrow streets has become a series of open and interconnected plazas. The specifics of the design work is still strong, however. Individual buildings maintain the ramshackle combination of materials and styles of the first game, despite their comparatively reduced scale, but this reduced scale allows the area's statement pieces to stand out more. Most zones have one or two large objects in them, which help them to be identified from disconnected areas, and in Halston the most recognisable one is the jail itself. Housed within a giant stone head adorned with crown, towering above the city, it's a visual statement as to the impact of Golem upon the city, but it also features one of my favourite additions to the visual language of the game. From a stone foot with an eye atop it acting as the centrepiece of a desert chasm, to the hands that hold up the pathways through the eastern mountains, Zenozoik has integrated body parts to the assortment of surreal visuals that adorn its environments, and their inclusion further elevates the alien designs of the previous game. Unfortunately, much of the world also suffers from the scale shifts in Halston. The world beyond Halston has a similar problem of most of its elements feeling smaller to enhance the feeling of scale for specific centerpieces within the landscape. This is exacerbated when visiting areas from the previous game. There are several zones that match up with areas visited in the first game, but they're always smaller. Paths are narrower, trees are shorter, plains are quicker to cross. Although zones are disconnected by loading screens, you can often see the next zone from the previous one, and vantage points will often let you see the larger elements of multiple zones. While this is good for helping with navigation, it makes the world feel a lot smaller than it did in the first game. In the original, the Corwood Wilds felt like there were many days' travel from Halston's outskirts. Here it's a few minutes' walk, and if you turn around you can still see Halston. When you reach the mountains you can see clear from Halston to the far side of the desert. An impressive view, but it reduces what felt like weeks of travel to an afternoon stroll. The open-world nature of the game lets you experience more of the world of Zenozoik, which is certainly worth experiencing, but it also shrinks the world considerably. This is disappointing, but admittedly unavoidable, especially given the impressively small size of the team behind it. Your excuse for exploring the world is twofold. Firstly, as part of Father-Mother's trial, the duo head out in search of their siblings, in the hopes of rallying them to the cause, with mixed results. More important is Gat's vendetta against the Golem, or to be more specific, the North Golem. It turns out there were 4 golems, one for each of the cardinal directions. The East and West golems are both dead, still sat decaying on their thrones when you find them, but the South golem appears quite early to help Gat and Remat out of a trap, providing access to one of the tools to unlock new areas. He starts on the periphery but gets more involved as the narrative progresses, though, like his northern brother, his initially helpful intervention quickly becomes more negatively impactful. Gat's hope is that by investigating the homes of the golems, he may find some way to defeat the North Golem, a weakness or the secret behind his power. To get to those places, he'll need Daedra's help again. Daedra is more confident than she was in the first game, but is still as caring and empathetic as before. She's taken on a leadership role in a new settlement, built alongside the coast. She's helped found the new village, hoping to escape the influences of the golem. The reduction of her role in the narrative is understandable. Remat is more violent than Daedra was, more at home in a fight, more able to physically match up against Gat, so it makes her a better pick for the player 2 slot of the optional co-op gameplay. As a solo player though, this introduces the problem of Remat being constantly present in the narrative, but only intermittently present during gameplay, only being summoned for fights occasionally. She also faces more conflict with Gat. They have differing priorities along their journey, and since much of the game is focused in parts of the world that the characters are unfamiliar with, there's no longer a need for a slightly sheltered character to act as an audience stand-in. The islands the Western Golem called home are a bust, just the corpse of the Golem and the same living statues you found at the end of the world. You get another piece of equipment there, a gauntlet that lets you link enemies together, damaging both at once. It's a weaker version of the North Golem's innate power, but it lets you bypass the defences he set up to stop you returning to the north end of the world. It's there that the Golem's secrets are uncovered, and the nature of Zenozoik itself is revealed. The End World was a lie. Deep within the temple lies a tunnel that travels deep under the jagged rocks and killer fog that stop your progress. There you emerge at a stormy coast, and across the water lies a vast city, high-tech buildings and the lights of flying vehicles travelling through the air. The North Golem refuses to let you continue though, threatening to kill himself, in turn killing everyone he's linked to back in Houston. He doesn't fully explain the truth, but between him and the writings in the Last Tomb, a hidden area built by the last tribe of people that could remember how to write, you get a picture of the history of Zenozoik. Zenozoik is not the whole world, it's a cross between a reservation and a prison. Long ago, though whether that is hundreds or millions of years no one remembers, the world began to see the appearance of hybrids, of humans and animals. These chimeras, these Xenos, were feared. They were seen as chaotic, proliferating without thought for genetic results, and so they were locked away. The land of Zenozoik was chosen because of its inaccessibility, beset on four sides by oceans, mountains, deserts, and snowy wastes, which made the area difficult to traverse, but within each of these areas was placed one of the golems to protect the border and turn back the Xenos who ventured there. The world forgot about the Xenos, and over time, the Xenos forgot the world. They faced a slow social decay, forgetting lore and history, everything the outside world saw as civilization, until they ended up as they appear in the game. But as powerful as the golems were, as effective as they were at keeping the world separate, over time the golems developed a fatal flaw: boredom. As the South Golem tells it, this boredom killed the West Golem. With nothing to do for an inhuman amount of time, he simply decayed into nothing. The East Golem too died of boredom, but in a different way. The canyon to the eastern mountains is blocked by a great door. It was sealed off after the East Golem's death due to his activities there. To cure his boredom, he was trying to deliberately create a new breed of Xenos. The goal was to create a race that was stronger, smarter, and more capable than those in the rest of Zenozoik. South claims he seemed to be seeing some success, and the results were hopeful, but he was interrupted before he could finish his work, and the result ended up being a race of short, two-headed monkey-like creatures. East was interrupted by North, who killed him. That's how South tells it. He was killed using something called the Law, which he describes as a weapon the golems can use against one another. The North and South golems are also suffering from the affliction, though only South seems aware of it. In North, it's manifesting in his attempts to introduce his definition of civilization to the people of Zenozoik, hoping they will one day be able to reintegrate with the rest of the world, thus ending his vigil. The Southern Golem just likes testing people. He has no desire to actually help Gat, he just wants to see what happens when he's given the tools to fight back. He always finds his subjects wanting, especially Father Mother, whom he kidnaps before the trial and strings up outside the southern gates of Houston before the parents of the kidnapped children. Gat and Remat save Father Mother, whose subtle design shifts make them feel even more pitiful and pathetic than they were in the first game, but the test is failed nonetheless. It wasn't to see if Gat and Remat could defeat the crowd, nor to see what the crowd would do when given the chance at vengeance. He just wanted to see if Father Mother would try to stop you fighting the parents of the children wronged. They didn't, which is a failure in the eyes of the Southern Golem. In a lot of ways, it's a narrative of colonisation. The North Golem trying to introduce what he sees as civilization, trying to impose his preferred structure on the locals while assuming they should be grateful for the gift, even being baffled and frustrated when they aren't. The Southern Golem, on the other hand, is more a researcher role, testing the natives, investigating them in his way, but not caring about the effects that his intervention is having, not caring about their well-being, only his own curiosity. They both see the Xenos as subjects, whether to be ruled or experimented upon. What's unusual is that the narrative is told from the perspective of the colonised. It's far more common for these kinds of narratives to be focused on the colonisers, to examine the development of and struggles to set up their view of civilization. When these narratives are critical of the Act, they're often still told from the colonial viewpoint, being focused on characters who change sides, so to speak, to oppose the actions of their own people, such as in James Cameron's Avatar. It's uncommon for colonisation narratives to be told from the viewpoint of the colonised themselves, to see the story from those struggling against these new ideas and new cultures being forced upon them. It's not a hugely detailed or in-depth examination of the topic, but it does elevate the narrative beyond what would have been strictly necessary to string a bunch of fights together. The North Golem is ultimately the more sympathetic of the two. He genuinely believes in the laws he's trying to impose, genuinely believes his presence will help the people of Zenozoik, and it turns out is genuinely opposed to harming the people under him, even if he reluctantly does so to uphold the laws he holds so highly. The final confrontation between Gat, Remat, and the Golems takes place at the highest point in Housedom, but it's the South Golem that acts as the game's final boss. Despite the Southern Golem's help throughout, he doesn't care about the people of Zenozoik, or much for the world beyond it. The North Golem ultimately realises that what he's done has caused more harm than good, and that the Southern Golem can't be trusted, so he disconnects his power from the people of Zenozoik and sacrifices himself to kill the Southern Golem, believing that with the death of all 4 Golems, a new set will be sent forth to protect the borders of Zenozoik instead. Whether or not they will be is unknown. Ace Team would go on to develop several more games after Zeno Clash 2, but it would be a whole decade before they would return to Zenozoik. There's been a lot of changes in Zenozoik since the last game. Clash differentiates itself from its predecessors through a major shift in mechanical presentation. The first-person brawling from the first 2 games is out, and now it's a third-person fighter with a close shoulder camera. If I told you the focus of the narrative of the game was on a tough but grouchy father figure gradually warming up to his smaller, weak child, often referred to simply as boy, you might start to think of another game. It's fair to say that Clash, Artifacts of Chaos and the 2018 God of War reboot share a lot of similarities. It's not unfair to say that Clash is in many ways a weird indie rendition of the same blueprint, but that classification isn't as derogatory as it may initially sound. I don't think there was any deliberate attempt at imitation, and that they achieved something so generously comparative with such a minuscule fraction of the resources is a real testament to the studio's abilities. The third-person camera allows for a much more expressive combat system than the first 2 games. Readability and spatial awareness can be limited in first person, so pulling the camera back eases these drawbacks, while also allowing a wider range of combat moves. This leads to varying combat stances and special moves for the player to mix and switch between, building out a combat system that they are comfortable with, while maintaining the earlier game's hectic one versus many combat situations that require good positioning and isolation of enemies before engaging. The change also allows for a wider variety of enemy types, stretching beyond the humanoid enemies and occasional animals and heavies of the earlier games to include a wider variety of body types, gigantic or 3-legged enemies, and most importantly, the chance to punch those weird barrel frogs in the face. Despite the perspective shift, the combat maintains the rhythm and impact of the previous games, so returning players will feel right at home. They'll feel at home in Zenozoik too. There's been a lot of changes since the previous games, but it's equally recognisable and maintains its broad artistic influences, while shifting some of the visual language to make the areas depicted feel fresh and different. It's a good balance. Still clearly the same world, the same setting, but without any areas feeling like something you visited before. There are echoes here and there of the previous outings in the world, but nothing that can be compared one for one to the previous games. This is arguably a good thing, since there are ways in which it falls short of those. Graphically, Clash has made great progress in the decades since the earlier works, but that comes with some drawbacks. The higher level and frequency of detail can make the world overly busy at times. There's also a shader applied across the board to imitate a sketchy illustrative style. The world is gorgeous, the illustrated aesthetic blends well with the martial arts focused world, but at times the detail and the sketchy lines can all blend together to be a slightly visually exhausting thing to look at. This is exacerbated by the item mechanics. Upgrade, crafting and trading materials scatter the land, and the player needs to be constantly focusing on spotting and gathering them. This maintains the focus on the outer borders of the play spaces, running around the edges of an area, trying to find bags and figures hidden among the rocks and foliage, drawing attention away from the grand vistas and large-scale environmental elements that make the game world so unique and worth exploring. While the player acquires little excuse to explore the world beyond curiosity, the same can't be said of the player's character. Pseudo is a hermit, well trained in martial arts but isolated from the world. He's gruff and harsh, but that covers a wry sense of humour and a softness underneath that begins to be drawn out as the game progresses. There's always the sense that he's the way he is because he has no other choice. Zenozoik is a harsh place of constant conflict. Pseudo is good at navigating this conflict through skill and technique, but you never get the sense he particularly enjoys it and wouldn't be happy with a quieter life. This attempt at a quieter life is interrupted when he comes across the boy. The boy is a small bird-like creature. At least he's assumed to be bird-like based on his grandpa and brother. He himself is little more than a big-eyed ball of black feathers on a pair of spindly chicken legs. Pseudo comes across the boy shortly after his grandpa has been killed in a fight. Pseudo defeats the attacker in his place and agrees to look after the boy until they can find him a permanent home. The boy's brother lives far away in the eastern mountains, so Pseudo decides to take the boy to Gemini's palace to find a messenger to take him the distance. Gemini's palace is the single largest structure in the world. It seems inspired by a combination of Aztec and Japanese aesthetics, though like much of the world building, the specifics of the design work stretch far beyond the baseline inspirations to make something truly unique. Gemini herself is a giant with two torsos. Her heads act independently, one loud and commanding, the other sickly and quiet. She's physically powerful, but her true power lies within the ritual, the one law. The titular artifacts are a set of icons used in a dice game before fights. You don't actually have to engage with it all that much if you don't want to, but if you do, you can add negative modifiers to your enemies at the risk of making the fights harder if you lose the dice game. Gemini holds the artifact of pain, the artifact which underpins the one law, from which all artifacts gain their power. It lets her hit you with a big stick right before the fight, whether or not you win the ritual, making her unbeatable. Unfortunately, it turns out she's also the one sending people out to capture the boy. He has a power she wants. Pseudo isn't about to hand him over, and this is still Zenozoik, so conflict remains inevitable. The ultimate goal is to defeat Gemini, but there's going to be a few steps to get there. Pseudo needs a series of 4 Great Shield artifacts. Each one negates the artifact of one of Gemini's guards, with the final negating her own artifact, allowing Pseudo to face each in a fair fight. But to gather these artifacts is going to require exploring all across Zenozoik, starting with the mountains, where the boy's brother lives. The brother wants nothing to do with the boy. He sees the boy as cursed, wants him as far away as possible. He's got enough problems as it is. Throughout the lands of Zenozoik are various people trying to deal with the chaos of the world in different ways. Gemini's ritual, the one law, is one that is adhered to by almost everyone, but there's also the director. He heads up a group known as the Eastern Zenozoik Players, who follow his directions precisely, if not always willingly. The director claims that as a child he heard a fragment of the Song of Creation. He believes the world is a stage and chaos is caused by people not playing their proper part, so he tries to impose order by ensuring people follow the proper script. Of course, imposing order so strictly doesn't work. It only takes one slip-up for his players to decide he's a fraud, that he doesn't really know people's correct roles, and since he happens to have one of the Great Shield artifacts, this particular slip-up is getting decked by Pseudo. Pseudo almost dies in the conflict but is saved by the boy's powers. While his brother agrees to take the boy in after the director's defeat, Pseudo realises the boy still won't be safe until Gemini is defeated, and with one of the 4 Great Shields in hand already, the duo set off to find the rest of them. Before that though, they decide to take a quick detour north. Pseudo used to live in the ruins to the north of Zenozoik, with his master who trained him in combat. If anyone should know more about the boy's powers, it's him, and though you don't find Pseudo's master among the black marble structures and living statues in the north, you still help the boy gain a better grasp of his curse. The boy can create bonds between living things. They can share their strength, allowing the boy to heal people by drawing strength from others as he did to save Pseudo, but it also means damage inflicted on one will be duplicated to the other. Gemini believes she can use this power to heal her sickly second half, allowing her to reign unopposed forever. The boy's better grasp on his powers opens the way to the rest of Zenozoik, including the Corwid Wilds. The Corwid don't get as fair representation as they did in the earlier games. Without Gat to vouch for them, the game only provides the view that they are mad and dangerous. They are still as disconnected from reality as ever, but you only ever meet violent Corwid this time around. In previous games, there were a scattering of non-violent Corwid discussed, and in both, the first Corwid you meet is minding their own business, headbutting things or being a tree respectively. In Clash, the first Corwid you meet is also minding his own business, but what he does is he makes the pigeons blood. The boy isn't particularly fond of witnessing this wanton murder of his feathered brethren, so a fight ensues, and you'll continue to fight all the way through Corwid territory. The Corwid Wilds are the most sprawling and complex area in the game. The whole world is a mass of shortcuts and backtracks, but the wilds tend to open up a little more, making them feel appropriately confusing to navigate. The Corwid are another group trying to deal with the chaos of Zenozoik in their own way, but unlike the director trying to impose a strict order on things, the Corwid lean heavily the other way. Like previously, each has their own thing they're focused on doing, and unlike the other residents of Zenozoik, they don't adhere to the ritual at all, except one. There's a Corwid deep in the wilds in possession of his father's Great Shield artifact. His father was a slave to the artifact because he treasured it too dearly, but this Corwid isn't like him. He is free because he doesn't treasure the artifact at all, which is why he can't just hand it over to Pseudo, because if he did, he wouldn't be able to not treasure it anymore. He claims his adherence to the ritual makes him more free than the other Corwids as well, since the other Corwids are trapped adhering to not adhering to the law. By following the law, he thinks for himself and is therefore more true to himself than the other Corwid, making him the truest Corwid. He then proceeds to eat half your dice midway through the ritual. The Corwid have always been a paradox, free from rationality or society but trapped by their own nature. It's summed up best by another holder of one of the shields. The Outcast tells you the story of his friend who became Corwid. His friend declared himself free. To prove he was free, wherever he went he carried a rock with him, which he used to smash himself in the head. That's just what he did. One day he split his head open with it and died. The Outcast observes that he may no longer have been a slave to reality, but he was a slave to the rock instead. His shield cancels Gemini's own artifact, but they were friends once. His was the only thing threatening Gemini's power, so he went into exile. The nature of the ritual forced him to leave his friend, forced him to live in fear that Gemini would one day send her goons after him to eliminate the threat against her. He's as much trapped by his great shield as his friend was by his rock. He agrees to fight you for the artifact as ritual demands, but he can't tell you why he follows the ritual anymore, since it has brought him nothing but pain. He actually doesn't even have the artifact on him, as he attempted to free himself from it by tossing it into the mouth of a great sleeping whale creature down the coast, but even that didn't help. That creature is Word. He's quite happy to vomit up the artifact for you after the boy uses his gift to wake him, and Word is insistent that it is a gift. He knows because he has a gift too, the gift of memory. Word is ancient, older than Zenozoik itself, so he knows its history and its nature. He shares some of both the pseudo and the boy, though each lacks the proper context to truly understand. He tells a story similar to, but different from the one in Zeno Clash 2. As Word tells it, long ago fear took hold in the people of the world, and some people decided that to end that fear, everything must be accorded its proper place, according to its essential nature. Those things that lacked an essential nature, those that were a little of one thing and a little of another, were placed in a great prison, known as Zenozoik. Others were opposed to this, because of course nothing truly has an essential nature. Some of those were similarly cast out, others snuck into Zenozoik willingly to bring aid, and while they hoped one day the division would be overcome, it wasn't. The borders of the two worlds closed forever. Those trapped inside eventually became Xenos and gradually forgot the world. The outside world is a place of order, with many laws, while Zenozoik is a place of chaos with only the one law. If the nature of the ritual seems arbitrary, that's because it is. As Word sees it, the artifacts have no true function beyond what is granted them by the belief of the people of Zenozoik. The one law and its artifacts are a shadow and an echo of an earlier time, remnants no longer serving their original intended purpose, and instead of bringing order, merely reflecting the chaos of the world that has forgotten their original function. Word's age gives him the context to see the system from without, and from what he sees, both Zenozoik and the world beyond are falling into ruin in their own ways, one too chaotic, the other too ordered. But the people of both are so trapped within the systems that govern their lives, they cannot see them for what they are, leaving them unable to change anything. The one other person old enough to have the historical context for Zenozoik, though unlike Word he too is trapped by the systems that govern it, is Pseudo's master, a being known as Kex-Te, the North Golem. The Golem is doing some experiments relating to the boy in a hideout just beyond the northern ruins. It's strongly implied that he trained Pseudo deliberately to act as the boy's protector and guided them to one another when needed. The Golem and Pseudo have something of an adversarial relationship due to Pseudo's protectiveness of the boy, but Golem does appear to care about Pseudo a great deal, reluctant to fight him when pushed. The inclusion of Golem would appear to set Clash up as a prequel to the other games, but the specifics of that don't really matter to the story. The setting is the same, has the same feel, matches the tone of the earlier games, but it still feels like a different version of the world, starting from the same basic set of ideas to reach a different result. It's clear that a great deal of time has passed between the two plots, but the specifics of which came first isn't important. All the golems of Zeno Clash 2 had Te after their names, so it's just as possible that Kex-Te simply means North Golem. This could be the same golem earlier in his life, or his replacement given the same name. The one law could be a remnant of the time before Zenozoik separated from the world, or it could be the last residual effects of the last golem's interference. Maybe the boy is the source of the power used by the golem in the first two games, but since Kex-Te appears to have the same power during the events of this game, maybe it's just as naturally occurring version of that power. Even the town doesn't help narrow things down. It stands to reason that the small settlement in the middle of the map would grow into Halsdom, but the location feels wrong, and a more logical location for Halsdom would be the towering spires of the one major landmark that can't actually be visited in-game, south of the map. The exact details of the timeline are unnecessary, and trying to pinpoint a clear sense of continuity and connection ends up distracting from the narrative actively being told. It's built upon the same setting because it examines similar themes, laws and the bonds that connect us, but it's using the same basic pieces to examine a different plot, rather than trying to conclusively develop a history of a fictional world. The end of this particular plot is focused on the breaking of those bonds. Having gathered the four shields, Pseudo confronts and defeats Gemini in her palace before returning to his home with the boy. It's unknown how long they live together in peace, but by the time the true ending arrives, they're explicitly referring to each other as father and son. Pseudo wakes one night to find the boy gone, and a mysterious pyramid floating above the highest peak in the eastern mountains. On that peak, Pseudo faces down his master to stop him taking the boy from Zenozoik, but ultimately the boy leaves willingly. It leads back to what Word was saying about both worlds crumbling. The boy creates bonds, and he hopes by leaving for the world outside he can create a bond between the two, ultimately saving both worlds. If this is a sequel, that doesn't work. If it's a prequel, it might still. If it's neither, it's still a thematically resonant ending. Word said something else when he insisted the boy's power is a gift, that with every gift comes the choice of how to use it. While the societal bonds of the ritual are used to restrict and harm, the emotional bonds between Pseudo and the boy have brought each of them strength and unity. A bond is neither a good or a bad thing in and of itself. Its nature changes based on its effects. The boy seeks to use his power to help people, as Pseudo helped him, even if breaking his bond with Pseudo will hurt both of them. Pseudo is forced to return home alone, but before he does, he destroys Gemini's artifact of pain in the forge at the centre of town, declaring that while there is no justice, there shall be no law. The ritual was arbitrary, a bond used to restrict people, to keep Gemini at the top and everyone else below. A bond that causes only harm should be broken, and so it is. All three Clash games are bound together by theme and style, as well as a mechanical experience, but despite being set in the same world, Artifacts of Chaos is very much its own story with its own ideas. Using some of the same pieces makes it feel familiar, but trying to bind the continuity of the two stories together benefits neither. All three are worth playing though, even beyond the strange world and great combat, both of which are very much worth experiencing. The games have a narrative strength that's unexpected. The games could have simply been a trio of beat-em-ups set in a strange world, but instead they push further to use that unique world as a backdrop for thematically complex narratives, and I hope Ace Team continues to do so in future. Thanks for watching.
Kill father, mother, you worthless cock!
Gonna bring you!